And again, it's a notable distinction. The use of log data contains clickstreams, right, enable really interesting metrics and analysis. Right now, we're completing a planning process with the W. Mellon Foundation to evolve this to community-supported, sustainable entity, but it's not going to be easy because we're relying on publishers, aggregators, and a whole bunch of organizations to freely donate their log data to us. And people don't like to donate web server log data because there's a whole bunch of problems with the confidential nature and user privacy, etc. But we might be able to solve it. Okay, innovation number 3, and this is where it gets really, really crazy, I think. This is where we're really getting into the 21st century. Behavioral and attention data, right? Again, 700 million people on Facebook, about, I don't know, how many, I lost count, 400 or 500 million people on Twitter. Huge numbers of people are on Twitter. A lot of them scientists, a lot of them scholars, and a lot of people use it to communicate, I wouldn't say scholarly results, but at least to point out that they are interested or influenced by a particular scholarly communication item. Right? And so what we have here is not so much behavioral data, so it's not data on who downloads an article or visits it, it's attention data. It's essentially people telling you on Twitter, my attention has been impinged upon by the scholarly communication item. Perhaps a little weaker than if you have a record of them downloading it, and perhaps that could be a little weaker than people telling you that they read it and they've cited it, but still there might be something in this data, right? So if you look at an initiative like Impact Store, right, you can look up an article, it will tell you how often it's been saved, bookmarked, how often it's been discussed on Twitter, etc., right? The question is just, is this data meaningful? And whenever I discuss Twitter for data analysis, people start to snicker, right? Because it's just a bunch of 13-year-old girls talking about Justin Bieber. And there's actually some relevant research I wanted to point out, which is really staggering. Like Eisenbach did this fantastic analysis. Can tweets predict citations? We looked at a cohort of papers, looked how often they were mentioned on Twitter, and then checked their citations afterwards, and found a very strong, significant correlation. I think that's weird, right? Because these 16-year-old, these 13-year-old girls talking about Justin Bieber seem to mention scholarly communication items or articles, and those mentions seem to have predictive value with respect to citation data. Right? The results are perhaps not entirely conclusive. It's an active research area. We actually, you can clearly see from the publication data that this is sort of a Me Too publication. That's not true. We're actually working at sort of more or less the same idea at the same time. How the scientific community ranks newly submitted preprints, and what we did is we looked at sort of a cohort. I'll show you a cohort of archive papers, right? Archive download data, right? And what we did is we retrieved the archive downloads of that cohort of papers submitted to archive within a particular period of time. We recorded their Twitter mentions by scanning a huge Twitter archive, basically just any tweet that had been submitted in that period of time, and then we checked their citations, Google Scholar citations, and what we found is that there is actually a very strong correlation between Twitter mentions and later citations, but it's not as strong with respect to archive downloads, which could mean that archive downloads are sort of a different indicator of people's interest in the article, or it could also be that our data is, it's pretty noisy as you can see. Right? So I can't fully vouch for these. People could argue on statistical grounds whether these correlations are strong enough, but they're highly suggestive that there's something going on in these environments that is reflective of scholarly impact and of scholarly influence. And that is very, very strange, I think. Frankly, to be honest, an article getting mentioned on Twitter X number of times, you would never expect that to have any bearing on the number of times it will get cited later on. So it's not the 13-year-olds, there's a lot of adult scientists on Twitter, and they're bragging about the cool papers that they've read, and then it gets retweeted by their colleagues, etc., and before you know it, there's a little bit of an avalanche in this big information processing space that has bearing on the scholarly community. Right? Now, again, really cool stuff. All of this information has now become part, if you go to Pillows, one is actually really built, and I looked it up for my own article. You can enter any list of articles. It would tell you how much it's been downloaded, how often it's been mentioned on Twitter, on Facebook. And if you look at the number of citations, they're much lower. Right? So these are much more sort of gregarious indicators, if you will. Yeah, I'm running up against the limit here. Okay, so citation data, metrics, impact, metrics, usage data. Let's step back. Work towards the conclusion here. Right? So you've heard me talk for about 30 minutes. I can see that I bored you all to death. I can tell from the expressions on your face. There's no leitmotif here, right? There's no leitmotif here. And the reason for that is that when you're trying to study something as nebulous as scholarly impact or influence without really knowing what that is, what that concept entails, without actually defining it, you run amok. You can define thousands of metrics, right? I can define a metric that ranks journals alphabetically and call that the impact factor. Why not? Right? So we're kind of like blind map makers. In the background you see a map of the Americas. It was produced very early on. And it was, as you can see, it was kind of inaccurate and incomplete, right? But these people at least knew that they were hitting land. Right? They didn't know what land, but they knew, oh, there's a big land mass here. It's in the way on our way to China.